Good evening, dear traveller, and welcome to a night of adventure, where tales spring to life and dreams drift in on the wings of whispered words. Tonight I invite you to settle in, perhaps by the soft glow of a lamp or by the comforting crackle of a homey hearth, and allow your mind to wander into distant lands filled with secrets and shadows. Our story begins in a kingdom that once danced with light and laughter, but now struggles beneath the weight of looming despair. Coffers grow empty, and hope feels scarce as the king, proud yet burdened, scrambles for a miracle. In the midst of this uncertainty, a miller's simple boast sets in motion a chain of events that will draw forth an ancient sorcerer, one whose secret name wields a potent magic unlike any other. Prepare to leave the familiar behind, dear traveller, for you are about to embark on a journey that twists between peril and promise, all hinging on a single, fateful bargain. Imagine the hush of twilight settling over a land where every tree and tower yearns for the sunlight of better days. The amber glow of lanterns flickers in palace corridors, casting long shadows that seem to whisper forbidden tales of enchantments and cunning deals struck under moonlit skies. In quiet villages beyond the palace walls, the people speak in hushed tones of a strange figure, a cloaked sorcerer who drifts through the gloom, appearing at the darkest hour to offer help at a dire cost. Within the castle, the king broods over empty vaults, his footsteps echoing in halls, once echoing with music and merriment. Servants hurry past, their expressions pinched with fear of what might happen if their monarch cannot find a way to replenish his treasury. Even the air itself seems to hold its breath in anticipation, as though waiting for the next chapter of fate to unfold. Deeper yet, in a tower chamber piled high with straw, a miller's daughter trembles. She has been asked to accomplish the impossible, spin gold from hay, and as she stares at the bundles that threaten to become her doom, a single question claws at her mind: who can save her? The sorcerer's secret name, a Rumpelstiltskin's bargain. Chapter 1. Midnight pressed against the king's palace walls, the flicker of torches revealing tapestries of bygone victories. Tension lingered in the corridors, fueled by rumors that a miller's daughter could spin straw into gold. The rumor began in a humble tavern, where the miller, Gerard, boasted of his daughter's extraordinary skill after too many drinks. Soon enough, word reached King Radomir, a monarch so desperate for new income that he seized upon any promise of gold. 3 days later, palace guards arrived at the mill, handing Gerard a royal summons. The miller's heart sank at his own foolish boast. His daughter Marlena was indeed a skilled spinner, but she held no magic to conjure gold. Still, the guards left her no choice. She was taken by carriage to the royal residence. Upon arriving at the throne room, she curtsied before King Radomir, who lounged in sumptuous robes of crimson and gold. "Marlena, daughter of Gerard the miller," he boomed, "they say you spin straw into gold." Marlena's cheeks flamed. "Your Majesty, I'm but a spinner of common fibres. This tale—" "Enough," the king interjected sharply, eyes gleaming with ambition. "Tonight you'll prove your craft. A chamber waits filled with straw. By dawn I expect gold, or you and your father shall pay for this lie." Dusk found Marlena ushered into a cramped tower room, the door bolted behind her. Piles of straw loomed, cold moonlight spilling through an arrow slit. She sank onto a small stool beside an old spinning wheel, tears threatening to fall. "How can I possibly spin straw into gold?" she whispered, pushing a strand of straw between her fingers. Her mind raced with images of her father, surely distraught at home, helpless to fix his careless boast. She tried to spin out of desperation, but the wheel offered nothing except the familiar scratch of straw against wood. Hours crept by with no hint of gold. Marlena, exhausted and fearful, pressed her forehead to the wheel. "Is there truly no way out of this?" she murmured, her voice trembling in the silence. Then, near midnight, a gentle rustling broke the stillness. Marlena looked up to see a small, cloaked figure step from the shadows. She nearly toppled off her stool, startled by his sudden appearance. Who are you?" she stammered, heart pounding.
"A friend or a foe?"
he replied, voice hushed, yet oddly resonant. "That depends on our bargain. I hear you need straw turned into gold." Marlena's breath caught. "I do, though it's impossible," she said, swallowing hard. "If I fail, the king will punish me. Please, if you can help me." He glanced at the spinning wheel. "I can do this miraculous spinning, but my service has a price." His gaze landed on the modest pearl necklace resting at Marlena's throat. She hesitated, touching the small heirloom, one of her last mementos of her late mother. "This necklace?" she asked softly. "A fair trade for tonight," he replied, stretching out a slender hand. Marlena, tears brimming, unclasped the pearl necklace. The stranger took it with a crooked smile, then seated himself at the wheel. As he spun, a pale glow seemed to shimmer around the bobbin. One by one, strands of straw transformed into gleaming gold. Watching in astonishment, Marlena felt terror and hope intertwine. Magic, real magic, she realized. By dawn, the chamber shone with piles of golden thread. The stranger, unruffled by his efforts, simply bowed. "You are safe. For now. Remember, the king's greed is boundless. My price will grow with each night." With that, he vanished, leaving Marlena shaken and surrounded by impossible wealth. Chapter 2. The morning after Marlena's first miraculous night, rumors tore through the palace like wildfire. The miller's daughter had spun straw into gold. King Radomir, seeing riches where once there was only despair, demanded more. That evening, 2 guards escorted Marlena to a new chamber, twice as large, stacked with even more straw. A single torch cast wavering shadows against the cold stone walls. The steward locked the door behind her, leaving her alone with a spinning wheel and an impossible command: produce gold again, or face dire consequences. She tried to spin, but the straw remained worthless in her hands. Glancing around in desperation, she murmured, "Please, if you can hear me, come back." Just when her hope threatened to collapse, the cloaked stranger slipped from behind a towering bale of straw. His voice, soft, almost amused, echoed in the quiet. "I expected you might need me again," he said, eyeing her with curiosity. "But I charge for my services." Marlena's heart clenched. She had no more heirlooms except her mother's simple silver wedding band. It was the last token connecting her to the woman she'd lost. Still, she couldn't refuse. With trembling hands, she slid the ring off. The stranger accepted it with a satisfied nod. "Stand back," he instructed gently, seating himself at the spinning wheel. Marlena watched in awe as he fed straw into the wheel. A faint glow surrounded each thread, transforming dull fiber into gleaming strands of gold. Hours passed, the chamber filling with treasure beyond her imagination. Despite her exhaustion, she stayed awake, haunted by the thought of what this bargain might cost her in the end. As dawn light touched the tower windows, the stranger finished the last of the straw. With a smirk he warned, "Be sure the king remains pleased. Your debts grow with every miracle." Then he vanished, leaving Marlena weak-kneed, yet alive. When the guards opened the door, gasps filled the corridor. Gold shimmered everywhere, an even greater feat than her first night. The king himself arrived, scarcely believing his eyes. "You have exceeded my expectations," he praised, though his gaze shone with unbridled greed. He dismissed onlookers and leaned in to Marlena. "Our fortunes are changed, my dear. There is much we must discuss." Shaken, Marlena could only nod. A steward led her away to a grander suite, closer to the king's quarters, and further from the humble safety she once knew. She felt the phantom weight of her mother's ring, now lost in shadowy bargains. That afternoon she tried to rest in a plush bed, but sleep would not come. What new price would she have to pay if the king demanded more? The thought gnawed at her until the day's last light flickered out, leaving her alone with a secret fear. The sorcerer's power might save her from the king's wrath, but who would save her from him? Chapter 3. Marlena stirred from uneasy dreams just before dawn, her mind still swirling with the events of the previous night. She sat up, pressing the heels of her hands against her tired eyes, as if to dispel the memories etched so deeply into her thoughts. Once again, the impossible had been made real. The straw in a second chamber, more plentiful than the first, had been transformed into shining gold by the same cloaked stranger who had appeared in her darkest moment. Though she had survived 2 nights of looming peril, she could sense that her trials were far from over. The king's eagerness for gold seemed insatiable. For a kingdom on the brink of ruin, the promise of newfound riches was too tantalizing to relinquish. Marlena imagined that the taste of such wealth, conjured from mere straw, had only sharpened his appetite for more. She rose from the bed in her newly appointed guest suite, exhaustion lingering in her bones. By the window, morning light gathered on the window panes, warming the glass. Marlena peered out to the courtyard below. Already, servants hustled and bustled, carrying chests of gold into storerooms. She spied the king's chief steward speaking animatedly with a cluster of guards. Their gestures were urgent, their faces lit with a combination of wonder and careful calculation. How would the king use this fresh fortune? And more importantly, how much more would he demand? A soft knock on the door pulled Marlena from her reverie. One of the king's attendants entered, bowing deeply. "Good morning, my lady," he said, respectfully lowering his eyes. "His Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber at once." Her heart fluttered. Another summons. Taking a fortifying breath, Marlena offered a brief nod. She turned away from the window, straightening her rumpled skirts. She yearned for more sleep, for a respite from the tension that seemed to coil around every corner of the palace. But the king's command could not be ignored. Once escorted through torchlit corridors, Marlena found herself in a large hall hung with maps and charts of the kingdom. At the far end stood a long table, where King Radomir conferred with a small circle of advisers. She recognized some by their fine robes and medallions: the Master of Coin, a grey-haired councillor bent over ledgers, the Chancellor, stoic but watchful, and a handful of noble lords murmuring among themselves. When Marlena entered, the king glanced up, his face lighting with a mixture of pride and calculation. "Ah, there you are," he said, beckoning her closer. "Gentlemen, we owe a great deal to this young woman. She has single-handedly transformed our hopes for the future." The advisers bowed their heads in acknowledgement. Marlena felt their curious, assessing stares more keenly than ever before. She was still the miller's daughter, unaccustomed to such scrutiny, yet they regarded her almost as a commodity, something too valuable to dismiss. "Indeed, your Majesty," ventured the Master of Coin, stroking his beard. With each new trove of gold, we have paid down old debts, reorganized the royal treasury, and begun forging alliances that were once out of reach. If this abundance continues, the kingdom will ascend to new heights." A chorus of agreement rippled around the table. The king's hand tightened against the chairback. Yes, new heights indeed. "And so, Marlena," he said, turning directly to her, "I must ask you once more to work your magic. There is still more straw waiting to be spun this very night." Marlena's heart lurched. Another room, another impossible demand. Even after 2 miracles, he had no intention of stopping. She steeled herself, reminding herself there was no safe protest she could voice. This is what he wants, she thought. An endless supply of gold to save the realm and feed his greed. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said quietly, dipping her head. Satisfied, the king dismissed his advisers for the moment, leaving Marlena briefly alone with him at the head of the table. He leaned in, voice low. "You've proven yourself indispensable. I want you to know that I do not make these demands lightly. The kingdom's future hangs on our ability to restore its prosperity. If you perform another feat like the last 2 nights," he paused, smiling with a confidence that almost made Marlena shiver, "I promise you a reward beyond measure." She forced a polite nod. "I live only to serve," she answered, the customary response of a subject to her sovereign. Yet inside, uncertainty swirled. What reward could justify being trapped night after night, reliant on a dark bargain she dared not reveal? The king seemed pleased nonetheless. With a final gesture, he escorted Marlena out of the council chamber, his gaze lingering on her, as if he were already envisioning the next mountain of gold. Word of the king's fresh command spread quickly among the palace staff. Marlena drifted through the corridors, overhearing tense whispers that the king had readied yet another room stacked with straw. A hush followed her steps, the hush of awe, curiosity, and a hint of unease. She did not know who might suspect trickery or witchcraft in her nightly labors. Some servants bowed out of respect, others looked on with something akin to fear. She felt their stares upon her back, the weight of so many judgments. "Does it matter what they think?" she asked herself bleakly. "My real problem is the sorcerer and the king's unending appetite for gold." Navigating the palace gardens gave her a momentary reprieve. She stepped onto a narrow path lined with rose bushes and fragrant lavender. Here, birds flitted between branches, their soft calls offering a sliver of serenity. Marlena breathed in the cool breeze, trying to steady her racing mind. She needed a plan, yet she had none. Her father, Gerard, was still in the city, likely anxious and guilt-ridden. She longed to confide in him. But how could she admit the truth, that a cloaked stranger had performed every wonder the king praised as her own skill? That she had already relinquished her beloved pearl necklace and her mother's ring to keep them both alive? In her father's presence, she would likely break down weeping, but that wouldn't solve anything. No, the only choice was to endure. "One more night," she whispered, closing her eyes beneath the midday sun. "I'll find a way to keep us safe." Yet, even as she tried to calm her nerves, she sensed a deeper foreboding, a warning that the stranger's demands would continue to escalate just as quickly as the king's. By dusk, Marlena was once again led through winding corridors to the threshold of a new room. Outside the door, the king's steward gave her a stiff bow before handing her a single torch. "It is larger than the last one, my lady," he said, unable to hide a note of apprehension in his voice. "The king wishes to see an even greater bounty by dawn." He pulled open the heavy door, revealing a vast chamber that dwarfed the previous two combined. Bales of straw, stacked higher than Marlena's head, loomed from wall to wall. Her torchlight cast a wan glow, painting a sea of pale yellow in the gloom. The familiar silhouette of a spinning wheel sat in the centre, looking impossibly small amid the mountain of straw. The steward hesitated, as if wanting to say something else. Ultimately, he only murmured, "Good fortune, my lady," then withdrew and locked the door behind him. The clang of the latch echoed off the arched ceiling, a reminder that she was once more sealed in with an impossible mandate. Marlena raised the torch. Dust motes spun in the light, and the sheer enormity of the task left her knees weak. She had already sacrificed so much to survive. What else can I offer? She wondered, thinking of the cloaked stranger's unwavering demands for payment. I have nothing left. But the night stretched ahead, merciless and unrelenting. Resolute, she moved to the spinning wheel, setting the torch in a nearby sconce to light her path. As on the previous nights, the straw felt coarse and lifeless between her fingers. She allowed herself a trembling exhale.
"If you're here," she whispered into the silence, "then come. I beg you."
Time slipped past in oppressive stillness. Marlena kept the spinning wheel turning, if only to break the crushing quiet. Her foot rose and fell on the treadle, straw fed into the orifice, but no magic appeared. Her heart clenched with every breath, anxiety mounting. He will come, she told herself, though an undercurrent of dread tugged at her. Perhaps the sorcerer had decided that 2 deals were enough, that she had nothing left to give. At last, the torch's flame flickered, disturbed by a faint draught. Marlena stiffened. A familiar shape emerged from the shadows, stepping effortlessly over piles of straw. The cloaked figure paused before her, that sly grin curling beneath the hood. "You call, and I come," he said softly. "Yet tonight feels different, does it not? The king's greed grows like a weed in spring."
Marlena swallowed, forcing herself to meet the stranger's gaze. "He wants more gold, far more than before. I have no choice but to ask your help again." She lifted her hands, palms open, and added in a tight whisper, "But I have nothing left to offer. No jewels, no heirlooms."
He clicked his tongue. "Ah, but you do. People always have something to give. A promise, a secret, a future vow." He let the words hang in the air, his intent clear, even if unstated. Dread twined in her gut. He wants something more dear than jewelry, she realized. But what could be more dear than my only keepsakes? The mere thought chilled her. She remembered the flash in his eyes when he took her mother's ring, the merciless amusement as he watched her grief. He would stop at nothing to secure a payment he deemed fit. "Tell me," she whispered, voice quivering, "what do you want this time?" His grin widened, revealing sharp intensity. "We'll come to that. First, the gold. I would not want you to think my demands unfair without seeing your reward." Without waiting for permission, he settled at the spinning wheel. Marlena clutched her arms around herself, feeling a strange mixture of relief and mounting terror. As before, he worked with uncanny speed, hands almost a blur on the spinning wheel. The hush of the chamber was broken by the steady rhythm of the treadle, and an electric hum of magic Marlena felt more than heard. She watched straw after straw vanish, replaced by glinting threads of pure gold that coiled around bobbins like captured sunlight. With each spool of gold, Marlena's breath caught. The piles of straw receded, replaced by mounds of treasure that sparkled in the feeble torchlight. Tension coiled at the base of her spine. She understood that every moment of awe carried its price. Every time the wheels spun, she sank deeper into the sorcerer's debt. When the last scrap of straw was consumed, the cloaked figure let out a quiet exhale. Gold glittered around them in majestic heaps. Even to Marlena's exhausted eyes, the transformation was breathtaking, an impossible miracle that would ensure the king's fortune swelled beyond measure. But now came the true cost. She stepped closer, hands trembling. "It is done," she managed. You've helped me again, so what payment do you claim?" A hush settled. The sorcerer rose, turning to face her. His gloved fingertips drummed lightly against the spinning wheel's surface. Marlena braced herself, but nothing could prepare her for what came next. "I told you," he said with quiet finality. "People always have more to offer. If I spin one more room of straw into gold for you, especially a room this large, I desire a promise of true worth." Her pulse thundered in her ears, eyes widening in alarm. I have nothing else," she insisted. "Please, you must see that I—" He raised a hand, silencing her. "You have your future," he said, each word landing with measured weight. "Tonight, I will accept only your promise that if you become queen, yes, child, the king's greed suggests he plans just that. Should you bear a child, you will owe that child to me." A jolt of horror ripped through her. She shrank back, pressing a hand to her chest as though to shield her very heart. My child?" she whispered, scarcely able to form the words. His face remained impassive. "Have you a better currency?" Tears gathered at the corners of Marlena's eyes. The cost was unthinkable, far beyond the loss of a pearl necklace or a cherished ring. Yet the alternative loomed. If she refused, morning would come, and the king would find her with nothing but straw. She and her father would suffer unimaginable consequences. "You must choose," he prompted, voice echoing in the cold stone room. "Refuse, and the king's wrath will be swift." Marlena's legs felt weak, as though the floor might open beneath her. She trembled, recalling her father's worried face, the king's harsh demands, the threat that hovered over her every night. No matter how monstrous, the sorcerer's terms still offered a chance to survive. Slowly, she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I promise," she choked out, If I ever have a child, you may—" Her voice failed, the enormity of the pledge overwhelming her. The sorcerer's lips curved into a thin smile. "So be it," he said, stepping forward just enough for her to sense an otherworldly chill in the air around him. "Our bargain is sealed." Tension bled from the sorcerer's posture, as if he were deeply satisfied to have secured something infinitely more precious than jewels. Without another word, he vanished into the gloom. One moment, Marlena stood face to face with him. The next, the faint flutter of his cloak disappeared among the golden piles. She collapsed to her knees, heart hammering. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling the sob that threatened to break free. What have I done? The gold around her felt like a hateful mockery of her innocence, a testament to a bargain that mortgaged her very future. But daylight was near, and she had no time to dwell on her horror. The king's men would soon arrive, marveling at yet another miracle. She knew the king's gratitude would be grand, perhaps even culminating in the offer of marriage that the sorcerer had foreseen. With a trembling sigh, Marlena pushed herself upright, brushing away tears. She had no choice but to face whatever came next, no matter how high the cost. At the first touch of dawn, the chamber door rattled open. The king and his retinue all but burst inside. a sea of gold, Marlena heard them gasp. Their shock gave way to elation, and she could practically feel the king's pleasure in the air as he surveyed the staggering wealth. Unaware of the vow she had just made, he regarded her as a living treasure, a person of unimaginable power. "Look at this," King Radomir breathed, turning to Marlena with eyes shining like a man possessed. "You have surpassed even my most optimistic hopes. The treasury overflows, and the kingdom's future is assured, all because of you." Exhausted beyond measure, Marlena inclined her head in silent acquiescence. The promises made in secret weighed upon her heavier than any crown could. She forced a half smile, letting the king bask in his fortune. Outside, trumpets blared the kingdom's victory to a rising sun. Inside, Marlena stood amid the glittering trove, soul torn by a bargain that bound her to a future heartbreak. Though for the king, this third triumph marked the culmination of a grand success, Marlena knew another story was quietly unfolding, a story of perilous promises and a debt she would one day be called to pay. Chapter 4. Marlena had barely recovered from her second ordeal when the king's summons came again. Just that morning, servants in the palace corridor were already exclaiming over the glittering heap of gold Marlena had spun overnight. The king paced his private receiving room like a restless hawk, eager for one more demonstration of her impossible talent. She was ushered in by a steward who bowed low before taking his leave. Within those walls, the hush pressed close, emphasizing each measured step Marlena took toward the king. Despite her exhaustion, she recognized the gleam in his eye, an avid, unstoppable hunger for more. "You have fulfilled my every command so far," he said, voice echoing through the chamber. "Yet I want to be sure our newfound prosperity is no fluke. Tonight, you will spin again in an even larger room." His words were both an order and a challenge. Marlena mustered a demure bow. "As you will, your majesty," she managed, her throat constricting around the reply. Though he offered a thin smile, the king's tone left no doubt. Failure was not an option. With a casual wave, he dismissed her. Guards waited at the door, silent reminders that she had no choice but to obey. Not long after sunset, Marlena found herself standing before yet another locked chamber. The steward twisted a heavy key in the door's ancient lock, and it groaned open, revealing a sight that stole her breath. Mountains of straw, far surpassing what she had faced before. The light of a single wall sconce wavered over those heaps, throwing ominous shadows that dwarfed the spinning wheel at the center. She stepped inside, her shoes scraping on the cold stone floor. Once again, the guards drew the door shut behind her, and the telltale click of the lock echoed in the stillness. Marlena slowly crossed the chamber, trailing her fingertips along coarse bales that rose almost to the ceiling. The scope of the task took on an impossibility that nearly paralyzed her. She thought of the cloaked stranger who had appeared, first to claim her grandmother's pearl necklace, then her mother's wedding band. "What can I possibly give him this time?" she wondered with mounting dread. "I have nothing left." Yet that dread also came with a flicker of strange relief. Terrible as he was, the sorcerer was her only hope. Without him, mourning would bring nothing but ruin. She sank onto the stool beside the spinning wheel, trying to steady her shaking hands. The wheel's wooden frame gleamed in the dull torchlight, mocking her with its promise. No matter how many times she tested the treadle, straw remained straw in her unremarkable fingers. Only the stranger's uncanny magic could conjure gold from such worthless chaff. For what felt like hours, she sat and waited. Her eyes would slip shut, then snap open at the faintest noise. Now and again, the torch sputtered, sending shadows skittering up the walls. Still no one came. What if he chooses not to appear? The idea sent her pulse racing. At last, a whisper of movement. Marlena straightened, heart leaping as the outline of a small figure emerged from behind a bale of straw. In the unsteady light, she made out the familiar hood and glimmering eyes. A swirl of his ragged cloak announced his presence, at once silent and disconcertingly confident. My, he said softly, surveying the towering piles. The king grows ambitious. She exhaled a trembling breath. You came. A slow grin curved beneath the hood. Your need calls louder each night, he replied, stepping closer. But I warned you that my help is not free. Marlena's voice quivered. I have nothing left to give. No jewels, no keepsakes, everything is gone. Yes, he agreed, an edge of amusement in his tone. Yet desperation can breed new forms of payment. He let a beat of silence linger, as though savoring the tension. Then, with disquieting calm, he said, You will soon be the king's greatest treasure. Should he decide to make you his queen, you may someday bear a child. Promise me that child, and I will spin all this straw into gold by dawn. She reeled, recoiling from the spinning wheel, as though it had suddenly grown teeth. My child, she whispered, horror creeping across her features. How can I pledge? How can you not? His gaze flicked meaningfully to the walls piled high with straw. When the sun rises, the king will expect gold. If he finds only straw, well, we both know the cost of failure. Tears welled in Marlena's eyes. She pictured her father's worried face, the king's stern countenance, her own life balancing on a knife's edge. And now a child, my firstborn. The notion burned like an icy weight in her chest. Yet what choice did she have? Her voice trembled. If I must, then yes, I promise you my firstborn if you save me again. Very good, he purred, stepping forward with a tilt of satisfaction. Sit back and watch. By dawn, your king's greed shall be appeased once more. Marlena scarcely had the will to stand. She shrank against a nearby straw bale, horrified by her own words. Yet the cloaked figure showed no hesitation. He settled at the spinning wheel, gloved fingers deft upon the distaff, and set the treadle in motion. A soft hum of power seemed to stir the air. The first strands of gleaming thread spun onto the bobbin, catching the torchlight like molten metal. On and on he worked, each piece of straw devoured by magic and reborn as gold. Time blurred. Marlena watched in a haze, her hands still trembling. She couldn't forget that in this moment she had exchanged more than heirlooms. She had traded away a future she hadn't yet lived. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw a phantom child slipping from her arms into the sorcerer's grasp. Yet the wheel spun ceaselessly, generating pile after pile of glittering thread. By the time the torch guttered low, the last bale of straw had vanished, replaced by an ocean of radiance that stretched almost wall to wall. The sorcerer paused, admired his handiwork, then slid from the stool with effortless grace. "It is done," he said, no boast in his voice, only certainty. "Do not forget your promise, Marlena." Before she could respond, he vanished into the darkness, leaving her adrift in the hush of the chamber. She sank to her knees, overwhelmed by fatigue and dread. The vast gold shimmered around her, mocking her predicament. When the door burst open at sunrise, the king's retinue stumbled in, bright-eyed with anticipation. Their gasps of awe rang through the stone vaults. Never had they seen so much gold, not even in the previous 2 nights combined. For Marlena, it felt like a hollow victory. She rose unsteadily from where she'd been huddled, numb with exhaustion. The king approached, face alight with admiration and greed. "You have proven yourself beyond any shadow of doubt," he declared, his eyes hardly leaving the golden trove. "None can rival your worth to me or to this kingdom. You must remain by my side always." She stood mute, letting the swirl of courtiers praise her, letting the king's words flow over her. Deep within, she carried the sting of her vow to the sorcerer. She knew her life had shifted once more, that the king's gratitude was only part of the story. And though he hadn't yet spoken the words outright, she sensed what was coming. With such a fortune at his disposal, the king would do more than protect Marlena. He would wed her to ensure her loyalty, and, in his mind, the kingdom's endless supply of gold. The court buzzed with excitement. Some whispered of a wedding, others of immediate public celebrations. But Marlena heard only the echo of that promise, "My firstborn child." Even as the king's arms drew her into the circle of his triumph, she felt the weight of a bargain sealed. She had passed the final test of spinning straw into gold, but at a cost she could scarcely fathom, her future already bartered away to a power whose name she still did not know. Chapter 5. Morning light filtered through the palace windows, illuminating marble floors and gilded columns with a warmth that felt almost celebratory. For the 3rd day in a row, trumpets sounded in the courtyard, but this time their call marked more than the discovery of fresh gold. They announced the king's official proclamation. He would take Marlena, the miller's daughter, as his bride. Such haste would have scandalized the court in quieter times, but nothing about Marlena's journey felt ordinary. Whispers of her miraculous talent spread through every corridor, from the scullery maids to the highest lords. Some praised her as a blessing fallen upon the kingdom in its hour of need. Others wondered whether darker forces were at play. Yet King Radomir's will proved absolute. He, who had ordered her locked away with mountains of straw, now hailed her as the kingdom's savior, and soon his queen. Marlena stood on a small balcony overlooking the palace gardens. Below, banners of scarlet and gold rippled in the breeze, and a bustle of activity hinted at the preparations for a lavish ceremony. Carpenters hurriedly assembled raised seating, seamstresses dashed about with armfuls of shimmering fabric. Even the royal stables teemed with servants polishing harnesses for the king's prized horses. All was set to dazzle envoys, nobles, and common folk alike. She pressed her hands to the balustrade, a swirl of conflicting emotions churning in her chest. On the surface, she should have felt relieved. After all, this wedding meant she and her father were safe from the king's wrath. No longer would she face knights locked away with impossible demands. The king's greed for gold, though unabated, had found a new outlet, possessing Marlena herself. He believed that as his wife, her power would forever remain at his disposal. Yet Marlena could not shake the chill of that final bargain. The cloaked sorcerer's whisper still haunted her. "Should you become queen and bear a child, that child is mine." Though she had accepted King Radomir's proposal, she carried the heavy weight of her promise in her heart. It turned every triumphant note of the trumpet into an uneasy echo. Before the wedding plans could fully overtake her day, Marlena received notice that her father, Gerard the miller, had arrived at the palace gates. She immediately instructed the guards to let him pass. Despite the king's newfound riches, she remained, at her core, the miller's daughter. She hurried to the palace entrance, anticipation and trepidation mingling in her veins. Gerard stood in the main foyer, bowing awkwardly at every curious servant who crossed his path. His simple tunic and worn boots contrasted with the opulence around him, but Marlena felt a rush of warmth and relief at the sight of his familiar, earnest face. "Father," she called, her voice echoing through the vaulted space. He looked up, and though he broke into a beaming smile, tears shimmered in his eyes. "My girl," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "I came as soon as I heard the news. They say the king intends to marry you and that you've filled his treasury with more gold than he's ever dreamed of. Is it all true?" Marlena's stomach twisted. "Yes, father, at least that's what he believes." She hesitated, longing to spill the truth about the sorcerer, the heartbreak of each bargain, but the words knotted in her throat. How could she tell him that all of this, her new finery, the kingdom's lavish festivities, rested on deals struck in desperation? Gerard glanced around, eyes wide at the marble floors, the jeweled chandeliers. "I never imagined," he confessed quietly. "If I hadn't boasted at that tavern, oh, Marlena, perhaps none of this would have happened. I just wanted you to be noticed, but I never meant—" She squeezed his hand gently. "Don't blame yourself. What's done is done." Yet guilt pricked her. She saw how her father's shoulders hunched under regret, as though he expected condemnation. "We're safe now," she tried to assure him. "The king? He won't harm us." Gerard nodded uncertainly. "If you're sure, my dear, if you're sure." She wished she felt sure. Instead, her heart pounded with the knowledge of a future debt that overshadowed any safety the king's favor might bring. Still, she ushered Gerard to a comfortable antechamber, instructing the servants to see to his rest and provide him with a more formal outfit for the upcoming ceremony. Whatever else she faced, she wanted her father at her side when she spoke her wedding vows. As the day wore on, a team of court tailors approached Marlena, bearing bolts of sumptuous cloth, satin the color of fresh cream, embroidered with gold thread so fine it shimmered like captured sunlight. They bustled about, measuring her arms and waist, exclaiming over every detail. "This is to be the grandest royal wedding in generations," one tailor effused. "You must outshine every jewel in the kingdom." Another pinned the hem of the gown with a flurry of quick needlework. Marlena stood still, arms outstretched, letting them fuss while her mind drifted. From the outer corridors came echoes of laughter, music, and the clang of hammers as carpenters set up seating for important guests. She realized with a jolt that by nightfall the entire palace would be a whirlwind of festivities. A smaller figure dashed in, a maidservant with a tray of tea and biscuits, her eyes round with excitement. "For energy, my lady," she offered. Marlena accepted the cup gratefully, though her stomach remained unsettled. Every sip tasted bittersweet, laced with the knowledge of the vow she'd made in secret. By late afternoon, Marlena was summoned to the king's receiving hall. She emerged in the newly fitted gown, its long sleeves and high neckline, framing her gracefully. The king, resplendent in robes of deep crimson trimmed with gold, turned to greet her, his expression triumphant. "Exquisite," he murmured, taking in her transformed appearance. He motioned her forward with a courteous bow. "Soon the entire realm will see our union as the dawn of a new age." She lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. Behind him stood a half-dozen courtiers, each one eager to offer congratulations, though whether they honored her as a person or the kingdom's golden goose, Marlena could not be sure. "Come," the king said, offering his arm. "We will walk the promenade so that the people may see us together." They stepped out onto a broad balcony that overlooked the main courtyard. Below, a crowd of townspeople, merchants, farmers, travellers, had gathered to catch a glimpse of the king's betrothed. Trumpeters stood at attention, horns raised. At the king's signal, a clarion note rang out, reverberating through the courtyard stones.
A cheer went up from the throng. Marlena could see hope shining in their eyes. They think this union guarantees endless wealth for the kingdom, she thought. They have no idea what price I've already paid.
Still, she waved gently, offering a tentative smile. If her presence as the king's bride could bring some solace to these people, if it could keep her father safe, then she would endure. A flick of guilt whispered through her. She was deceiving everyone about the true source of the gold. Yet to reveal the truth would be far worse. The king might punish her father, or the sorcerer might exact an even more horrifying penalty. Twilight arrived in a blaze of colour, the western sky drenched in orange and purple hues. Courtiers and nobles assembled in a grand courtyard, ringed by flowering arches and floating lanterns. A long silk carpet stretched from the palace doors to an ornate dais at the centre, where a herald trumpeted the procession's commencement. Gerard was already seated in a place of honour, wearing a borrowed tunic of burgundy velvet. Marlena caught his eye as she emerged, her heart swelling with both love and sorrow. He looked so proud, she thought, swallowing back tears. Accompanied by a sombre roll of drums, Marlena walked slowly down the carpet, flanked on all sides by torchlight. The king waited at the dais, standing beneath an elegant canopy embroidered with the royal crest. In that moment, with thousands of eyes upon her, Marlena held her head high, determined to embrace the role fate had thrust upon her. Priests of the royal chapel gathered, their voices rising in solemn intonation as the ceremony began. Vows were exchanged in formal, resonant language echoing off the courtyard walls. The king slipped a golden circlet onto Marlena's finger, one encrusted with a single ruby that caught the torchlight in a fiery gleam. Another ring, she thought, her mind flicking to the humble wedding band the sorcerer had claimed nights before. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Rose petals rained down from above, carried in baskets by excited children. Musicians struck up a triumphant fanfare, the joyous notes drifting to the outer edges of the city. Marlena found herself swept into the king's arms. A hush passed over her own heart, overshadowed by the lingering memory of a promise that threatened everything this celebration represented. Still, she forced a radiant smile, for the kingdom's eyes were upon her. Long tables were set up in the grand hall, laden with roasted meats, fresh fruits, and gleaming silverware. Courtiers vied for Marlena's attention, offering florid compliments and toasts to the Queen of Gold. The king, flush with success, beamed at every well-wisher. Musk-scented candles burned in candelabras along the walls, and dancers in colourful costumes glided across the marble floor. Amid the revelry, Marlena caught sight of Gerard. They exchanged a small nod across the table, an unspoken bond of love and shared relief. "We are safe, for now," she reminded herself. Yet in the midst of the swirling festivities, she could not banish the chill creeping through her mind. She was queen. The king had everything he desired, a treasury brimming with gold, a bride who embodied his kingdom's newfound fortune. How long would it be until he asked for more? Or worse still, what would happen when Marlena's unholy bargain with the sorcerer finally came due? She looked down at her plate, the sumptuous feast tasting suddenly bland. "I must guard my secret carefully," she thought, "for if the king learns what I have promised, all of this my marriage, my father's safety may be lost. Late into the night, the royal couple was escorted by cheering attendants to the private wing of the palace, where their new life together truly began. Exhausted, yet bound by duty, Marlena walked the corridors in a daze, the echoes of music and conversation trailing behind. Red petals from the wedding procession still clung to the train of her gown, fluttering to the ground with each step. When they reached their final door for the evening, the king turned to her with a gentle smile. He lifted her hand, pressing a courtly kiss to her knuckles. "You've made me the happiest man in the realm," he said quietly. Marlena managed a steady nod, echoing a soft courtesy. It was all so surreal, the transformation from captive spinner to cherished queen. Yet the heavy weight of her hidden promise remained. She recalled the sorcerer's last words in the quiet chamber of straw, the memory of his parting grin chilling her more than the night air. As the doors closed behind them, the palace hushed, leaving only the distant hum of continuing festivities. Marlena glanced around the luxurious bedchamber, a space far removed from the cramped tower where she'd once huddled beside a spinning wheel. Gilded mirrors and velvet curtains reflected a life of splendor, but beneath it all lay the hush of an unpaid debt. The king allowed her a brief moment of solitude to gather herself, and she stood by the window, peering at the moonlit gardens below. A new chapter in her life had begun, one gilded with wealth and crowned by a kingdom's devotion. Yet the bitter truth lingered in the recesses of her mind. For all the king's triumph, and for all her own transformation into Queen Marlena, a perilous secret threatened the foundations of this marriage. "If I ever bear a child," she thought, pressing a hand to her stomach in sudden trepidation, "it belongs to him." With that cold understanding sealed in her heart, Queen Marlena closed her eyes, inhaling the fragrant midnight breeze, and prepared to face the uncertain path that lay ahead. Chapter 6. Moonlight flooded the palace corridors, illuminating centuries-old tapestries and echoing footsteps in long, quiet halls. Though midnight had come and gone, Queen Marlena could not sleep. She had taken to pacing the floors of her private apartments, one hand pressed to the swell of her abdomen. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the child she carried weighed upon her heart as much as her body. Months had passed since her marriage to King Radomir. In that time, the kingdom flourished, trade boomed, farms recovered from their lean seasons, and the people spoke with gratitude of the Queen's miraculous gift, the very reason they believed their coffers overflowed. Marlena smiled for them when she made appearances at court, offering kind words and encouraging the king's reforms. Outwardly, everything seemed idyllic, but within her another truth burned. She remembered the sorcerer's cold voice on that fateful third night. "Promise me your firstborn, and I shall spin this final chamber of straw into gold." She had promised, and now the child grew within her. Each day brought them closer to the moment she both longed for and dreaded. For all those months, the sorcerer gave no sign of himself. He never appeared in her chambers, never showed his pale face behind a swirl of straw. At times, Marlena dared hope that he had forgotten. Perhaps the vow would dissolve in silence, and he would never return. Yet, late at night, when sleep eluded her, she felt certain that he was only biding his time, waiting for the moment the child drew its first breath. King Radomir, oblivious to her private torment, brimmed with excitement. From the day Marlena first informed him she was with child, he could hardly contain his joy. The king ordered the palace to be redecorated in brilliant colors and distributed food to the masses in celebration. He talked incessantly of teaching the child to ride, to hunt, to rule. Ministers whispered that the birth of an heir would secure the future of a dynasty made newly wealthy by the queen's magic. Marlena kept her fears to herself, wearing her composure like a veil that no one in the palace dared to lift. Yet as her belly swelled, those who observed her closely, her ladies-in-waiting, the royal physician, noticed shadows under her eyes and moments of unspoken worry. They assumed her anxieties were the natural concerns of a first-time mother, never suspecting the darker reason coiled behind them. As the final weeks of pregnancy arrived, the king insisted Marlena rest. He cleared her calendar of courtly duties, instructing her ladies-in-waiting to attend to her every comfort. She was given the sunniest suite in the palace, opening onto a private terrace with a view of the rose gardens below. From that vantage, Marlena spent hours watching the bees flit among blossoms, attempting to calm herself with the gentle rhythms of nature. Sometimes Gerard the miller, now living in modest comfort within the city, would visit. They would sit by the terrace rail, talking softly of simpler times at the mill. Though he never spoke it aloud, Marlena sensed her father's lingering guilt for his boast that had led them here. Still he did his utmost to console her, bringing freshly ground flour or freshly baked treats, as if returning to a life they both missed. Marlena found solace in these visits, though she never dared speak the full truth of her bargain. In idle moments, Marlena tried to imagine what her baby would look like. A boy or a girl? With the king's piercing eyes, or perhaps my own softer features. The thought of holding a tiny new life in her arms filled her with warmth and dread in equal measure. Will I truly be allowed to keep my child? Her promise rang like a curse in her mind, one she could neither break nor outrun. King Radomir, meanwhile, made grand announcements throughout the realm, promising a week of festivities once the heir was born. Envoys from neighboring kingdoms arrived, bearing gifts of precious metals, silks, and exotic spices. They all sought to curry favor with the monarch, whose fortunes had soared so dramatically in recent times. There will be a grand feast, the king told Marlena one evening, leaning over her chair as she tried to read by the lamplight. We'll invite the nobles of every allied state. Our child's christening will be the most magnificent the kingdom has ever seen. Though she offered a soft smile, Marlena could only think, if he knew the danger, he would not plan so far ahead. She felt the baby move, an unmistakable flutter beneath her ribs. Her hand went automatically to her belly. On its own, the sensation ignited a fierce maternal instinct, a sudden burst of determination she did not know she possessed. No matter what bargain I made, I must protect this child. That moment came sooner than expected. Deep into a quiet night, thunder rumbled across a sky thick with storm clouds. Rain hammered the palace rooftops, filling the corridors with the pounding roar of water. Marlena, lying awake in her bedchamber, winced as a wave of pain seized her abdomen. At first, she tried to breathe through it, hoping it might subside, but another wave soon followed, more intense. Her heart kicked into a frantic tempo. "It's time! Early! But it must be time!" she called out, and her ladies-in-waiting rushed in, their lanterns bobbing in the darkness. One immediately sent for the royal physician, while another helped Marlena to her feet. The pain returned, rolling through her body, and she clutched her attendant's arm to keep from collapsing. By the time King Radomir arrived, robe hastily thrown over his nightclothes, the bedchamber had transformed into a flurry of purposeful activity. Midwives bustled, laying out linens and heated water, coaxing Marlena to breathe, to focus. Rain pelted the windows, lightning occasionally illuminating anxious faces with stark clarity. The king hovered just outside a curtained partition, his expression oscillating between excitement and fear for his wife. "Breathe, your majesty," the senior midwife urged gently. "Breathe and let the storm pass through you." Marlena squeezed her eyes shut, fighting to remain calm despite the mounting pain and the knowledge of what might follow once her child was born. "Don't think of him now," she ordered herself, struggling to lock away the memory of that cloaked stranger. Focus on bringing this baby safely into the world. Labor stretched over hours that blurred into a single tumult of thunder, rain, and Marlena's ragged breathing. The midwives' voices wove around her, sometimes soothing, sometimes urgent. King Radomir, though determined to remain close, was discreetly guided to wait in the adjoining chamber. Near dawn, the storm's fury slackened. Grey light seeped through the windows, revealing the paleness of Marlena's face and the tension lining every corner of the room. Another searing contraction tore through her, and she gripped the midwife's hand with a strength born of desperation. A final push, and then the piercing cry of an infant. Marlena felt a rush of relief so profound she nearly wept. Collapsing back against the pillows, she watched, trembling with exhaustion, as one midwife carefully wrapped the newborn in soft linens while another announced, "A prince, your majesty. A strong, healthy boy." He wailed, eyes squeezed shut, little fists flailing in the bright new world. Marlena opened her arms, tears trickling down her cheeks, and the midwife laid the child there. The first brush of his cheek against her skin unleashed a tidal wave of love, so pure and boundless that for a few precious seconds she forgot every terror, every looming threat. In the hush of that morning lull, the storm clouds outside parted to let a single shaft of dawn light spill across the bed. Marlena cupped the baby's head in her hand, marveling at his tiny features. Her entire being thrummed with a mother's instinct to protect him, to shield him from any harm. "My son," she thought, her heart swelling with awe. At news of the safe birth, King Radomir rushed into the bedchamber. His face was flushed with both anxiety and elation. When he saw Marlena cradling their son, his eyes lit with an unrestrained joy she had never witnessed before. Gently, he knelt beside the bed, his gaze traveling from the little prince's wrinkled brow to Marlena's tear-streaked face. "You've done it," he breathed, voice trembling with emotion. "Our son, the heir to the kingdom." Marlena tried to offer a smile, though exhaustion dulled the edges of her consciousness. "He's here, Radomir," she murmured. "He's real." Wrapping an arm around them both, the king pressed a tender kiss to Marlena's brow, then carefully laid a hand atop the baby's swaddled form. Servants and midwives lingered at a respectful distance, hushed with the reverence of such a moment. Light footsteps echoed as a physician stepped forward to gently check the infant's breathing and pulse, nodding in approval. "We shall celebrate at once," King Radomir declared, though he kept his voice quiet so as not to startle the baby. "The entire kingdom will rejoice in his arrival." Marlena nodded, but inside, unease churned. She could feel the fragile warmth of her son's body against her own, knew the fierce love that had already taken root in her heart. "I cannot lose him, no matter what vow I made." She pressed her lips to the infant's soft hair, inhaling the scent of new life. If only she could keep this moment forever, untouched by the outside world, or the supernatural claims that might shatter it. As the minutes turned to hours, a gentle calm settled over the palace. Sleepy courtiers and staff stirred from their rooms, learning of the birth with a swell of relief and delight. Gerard the miller was roused from the modest guest quarters the palace had offered, tears of joy in his eyes when he heard the good news. In the bedchamber, the king eventually agreed to let Marlena rest, ordering the corridor cleared so she could sleep undisturbed. Marlena, her infant son clutched protectively against her, closed her eyes at last. The swirl of pain and adrenaline receded like the ebb of a tidal wave. But rest was fleeting. Her mind, haunted by the weight of an unbreakable promise, would not let her find true peace. Even as she drifted into a doze, the child's soft breath reminding her of all she had to lose, a question tremored in the depths of her thoughts. When will he come? She sensed the sorcerer's presence like a distant thunderclap, a threat not yet manifested but inevitable. Indeed, the vow she had spoken was as binding as any chain. She could almost feel its iron links in her dreams. In that fragile space between consciousness and slumber, Marlena prayed wordlessly that her love for her son might be enough to repel the dark magic that held her to the bargain. For now, though, the palace lit up with celebration. Trumpets blared at the gates, servants rushed to decorate the halls with fresh blooms, and a father's proud laughter echoed through the corridors. The news spread quickly. A prince had been born. A new generation promised hope for the kingdom's bright future. Only Marlena knew that beneath the shining tapestry of festivities, a doom-laden promise cast a long, looming shadow. Chapter 7. In the weeks following the young prince's birth, the palace stood in a state of bright celebration. Flags hung from every turret. Musicians roamed the corridors, filling them with lively tunes. Citizens thronged outside the gates to leave gifts or simply catch a glimpse of the new heir. King Radomir, flushed with paternal pride, hosted feasts in the great hall, inviting nobles and dignitaries from across the realm. His booming laughter echoed through banquet after banquet, his heart untroubled by shadows he did not see. But Queen Marlena sensed a deeper disquiet. Each time she cradled her son in her arms, she felt the ghost of a promise made on that final night, of spinning straw into gold. The hush of her bedchamber at dusk brought memories of a cloaked figure with cunning eyes, a man who possessed the power to vanish at will, and who had once demanded her child. Some nights Marlena found herself gazing into the cradle, whispering silent prayers that her vow would remain buried in the past. Her worst fears were confirmed one crisp autumn evening. The day had been filled with festivities. A travelling troupe of acrobats performed in the courtyard to amuse the king and his retinue, while Marlena discreetly withdrew to her private chambers. She nursed her baby as the setting sun cast long beams across the marble floor. Outside, a harvest moon rose in a sky of burnished gold. As the palace corridors fell quiet and torchlight replaced the waning sun, Marlena gently laid her son in his cradle, humming a lullaby under her breath. She had barely finished tucking him beneath a soft blanket when the candles in the room flickered violently, as though disturbed by a sudden gust of wind. Her heart skipped. She turned to see the familiar shape of a small, cloaked figure stepping from the darkest corner of the room. Though his hood concealed much of his face, she recognized the gleaming pinpoints of his eyes and the mocking twist of his lips. "You did not forget me, did you?" the stranger asked softly, voice coiling in the silence. "At last, the time for payment has arrived." Marlena's mouth went dry. Pressing a trembling hand to the cradle, she blocked the sorcerer's view of her sleeping baby. "No," she whispered, throat tight. I never forgot. But please, not my child. Take anything else you want." Take gold or jewels, take half the kingdom if you must." He let out a low, humourless laugh. "And what need have I of trinkets when I can spin gold from straw? We struck a bargain. You offered me your firstborn child. The king's treasury may be bottomless, but my bargain stands." Marlena bowed her head, feeling the weight of every misdeed, every compromise, settle upon her. For a moment, she could barely speak. The baby shifted in his cradle, unaware of the tension pulsing through the room. Then, in desperation, Marlena raised her tearful eyes. "There must be another way," she begged, voice trembling. "A test, a challenge, some means I can prove my worth, so that you release me from this debt." The sorcerer considered her, head tilted to one side. "Another bargain," he mused. How predictable. Still, his lips curved into a slow, predatory smile. "I do love to play. Very well. Guess my true name in 3 nights, and the child is yours to keep. Fail, and he will be mine forever." The moment the sorcerer vanished, Marlena pressed her hands to her face, fighting back a sob. She glanced at her sleeping son, love and terror igniting a fierce resolve within her. She would not lose him. No matter what name he hides behind, I must discover it. Though the hour was late, she summoned the few most trusted servants she could rely on. Together they pored over ancient tomes in the palace library by candlelight, searching for any clue to a sorcerer's name. She wrote down every strange or ominous name her advisors could recall, names of demons, fey creatures, wandering enchanters. As midnight deepened, she compiled a long list, perhaps 100 names, gleaned from old folklore and half-forgotten legends. When at last the clock in the tower struck the hour of 1, Marlena sent the servants away to rest and clutched her list to her chest. A dreadful mix of hope and hopelessness churned in her mind. Sure enough, the sorcerer reappeared the moment she stood alone in her chamber, the air shifting with an unnatural gust. "So, have you a name for me?" he asked in a mocking tone.
Heart pounding, Marlena recited the names one by one, some harsh and guttural, others fluid and whimsical. She stumbled through them, her voice rising in desperation each time. The sorcerer simply watched, brows arched in amusement, until she reached the final guess. "None of these are mine," he said coolly. "You have wasted your first night, dear queen." In the cradle, the baby stirred. Marlena's breath caught, but the sorcerer vanished before she could protest further, leaving her alone with the echo of her own heavy breathing.
Morning came, and Marlena wasted no time. If the court wondered at her sudden urgency, no one dared question their queen too closely. She sent out scouts, scribes, and secret messengers across the kingdom, instructing them to gather even the most outlandish rumors of enchanters or sprites. From remote villages to mountain passes, they sought any scrap of a name that might be a key to break the sorcerer's hold. By dusk, a handful of these messengers returned, exhausted but triumphant. One told a peculiar tale overheard in a distant hamlet. A hunched figure had been seen dancing near a woodland campfire, chanting strange words into the night. "I heard him cackling about a queen's baby," the messenger claimed, still shaken. "He repeated a name, but it sounded too odd to be real. I almost thought I dreamt it."
Marlena's heart gave a sudden leap. "Tell me everything." After listening closely to the messenger's recollection, Marlena carefully penned the strange sing-song phrase he had overheard. If it was a clue, it might be her best hope. She kept this secret from all but her closest aide, fearing spies might report it to the sorcerer.
Night descended again, with the moon high above the palace turrets. Marlena stood by her child's cradle, the slip of paper clutched in her sweating hand. The sorcerer appeared as if summoned by her anxiety, stepping into the flickering candlelight. "Ready for your second attempt?" he drawled, leaning casually against the wall. "I do enjoy your desperate guesses." Marlena forced composure, clearing her throat. "Tonight I have more names," she said, careful to keep a note of uncertainty in her voice. She listed additional possibilities gleaned from her scouts, odd monikers from every corner of the kingdom. As she spoke each one, she studied the sorcerer's face for any twitch of recognition. He remained impassive, arms folded, until she arrived at the last name on her list. "That one," he said smoothly, "is also incorrect." Her heart sank. She had not yet dared say the peculiar name from the messenger's story. Something about the sorcerer dancing around a fire, chanting in triumph. I must keep it back for the final night, in case I'm wrong. If she guessed incorrectly now, she might have nothing left for her last chance. Again, the sorcerer vanished. Again, Marlena faced her sleeping baby with trembling hands, dread coursing through her. One night remained, one final guess, and her only clue was still unproven. Though exhaustion weighed on her like a heavy mantle, Marlena refused to sleep. She sent her aide to scour the palace grounds, confirming every detail from the messenger's tale. More scouts were dispatched into the woods where the figure had been spotted. If the story was true, perhaps someone else had heard the same chant, or glimpsed him dancing. Any corroboration would give Marlena greater confidence in the name she planned to wager. Sure enough, a second messenger arrived near dawn, panting from a night's ride. He had spied the remains of a recent campfire in a clearing. While lingering in the brush, he overheard the faint echo of a voice singing in high-pitched glee, though the words were barely discernible. "It must be him," Marlena thought. "He is taunting me from the shadows, certain I will fail." She closed her eyes, the baby's soft coos at her side, strengthening her resolve. "I cannot fail. My child's life depends on this single name." The third night arrived with ominous calm. The palace windows were thrown open to capture the cool evening breeze. The corridors were strangely hushed, as though even the servants could sense the momentous struggle unfolding beyond their view. In Marlena's bedchamber, a single lamp burned on the table near the cradle, where the baby slept peacefully. Marlena paced the rug, biting her lip until she tasted blood. She held the slip of paper with the mysterious name in her palm, its letters half smudged by her anxious grip. She prayed that the tales her scouts brought were true, for she had no alternative left. At the stroke of midnight, the air turned chill. The sorcerer materialized, a smug grin tilting the corners of his lips. "Well, Queen Marlena," he said, casting a glance at the cradle, "it is your final chance. If you cannot name me correctly tonight, I shall take what is mine." She halted, steeling herself. Memories flashed behind her eyes. The empty bales of straw transformed to gold, the ring and necklace she had given up, the look of triumph when he had extracted a promise for her firstborn. Then she gazed at her infant son, swaddled in gentle moonlight, innocent of any bargain or debt. With a steady breath, she began listing names, some new, some repeated for effect. Each one she spoke with deliberate slowness, watching his reaction. He only shook his head, arms folded, until she reached the final name on her lips, the one gleaned from a forest clearing, an overheard chant by a midnight fire. "I believe," Marlena said softly, "that your name is Rumpelstiltskin." A moment of absolute stillness seized the room. The sorcerer's grin froze, shock flashing in his eyes, and he let out a horrible, shrieking cry that shattered the silence. The candlestick on the table rattled, its flame dancing wildly as if caught in a storm. "How?" he spat, voice twisting in fury. "Who told you that? How could you?" He stomped his foot with such force that the floor beneath him cracked. Anger distorted his features, making him look less human, more beastly. Marlena gasped, clutching the cradle protectively. The baby stirred, but did not wake, as if shielded from the sorcerer's malevolence by the knowledge of his name. "You have bested me," Rumpelstiltskin growled, seething. "Clever queen, weaving your spies through the kingdom. Well, if I cannot have the child, then—" His words broke off as a wave of his own magic erupted in a chaotic, crackling wave. The windows rattled, a furious wind lashed through the room, and the sorcerer seemed to tear at the space around him, twisting in arcs of shimmering light. With one last outraged cry, he vanished, leaving only the echo of that shriek reverberating against the walls. A moment later, the lamp's flame steadied, the wind fell silent, and it was as though he had never been there at all, except for the jagged crack in the floor where he had stomped in fury. For several heartbeats, Marlena could not move. She pressed a hand to her chest, exhaling a tremulous breath. Then she rushed to the cradle, the baby's eyes fluttering sleepily in the lamp's glow. He yawned and kicked his tiny feet, safe and sound, unaware of the danger that had hovered so close. Tears welled in Marlena's eyes, tears of relief, exhaustion, and a joy so piercing it nearly hurt. "My son is free," she thought, lifting him into her arms. "He will never be claimed by that sorcerer." She looked around the bedchamber, now eerily calm after the sorcerer's violent exit. Dust motes glimmered in the lantern light, floating through the quiet air. The only evidence of the sorcerer's presence was the small fracture in the stone floor, a physical scar that would remind her of the bargain she had narrowly escaped. Pressing her lips to her son's forehead, she cradled him close. The fear that had haunted her every breath for months, ever since the night she promised him away, began to melt like ice in the morning sun. She would keep her child, free from the terrifying compacts made in despair. Outside, the palace lay in peaceful slumber. Not a single guard or servant realized that the realm's gravest threat had just been dispelled by the power of a single whispered name. Marlena held her child, rocking him gently until his eyes closed once again in slumber. When morning came, she would silently rejoice in the day's bright promise, knowing the darkest part of her journey had come to an end. Before the first rays of dawn tinted the sky, Marlena allowed herself to rest. She curled into bed with the baby at her side, the swirl of tension in her chest finally easing into a deep, dreamless sleep. My child is safe. The vow is broken. And so, when the sun rose over the palace spires, casting gilded light through the windows, Queen Marlena opened her eyes to a life unburdened by the sorcerer's bargain. The kingdom, oblivious, began another ordinary day. Yet for Marlena, everything had changed in the silence of the night. She would say nothing of the final confrontation, and her people would remain content in their belief that the Queen's miraculous abilities had secured the kingdom's good fortune. The king might notice the cracked floor someday, or perhaps the swirl of magic that had left its trace in the air. But none would guess the tempest that had raged around a humble cradle, nor the price a mother was ready to pay for her child's safety. In time, whispers of a peculiar name, Rumpelstiltskin, would circulate through remote villages and travelers' tales, passing into legend, a cautionary echo of a sorcerer's hunger, broken only by the knowledge of his true name. But to Marlena, it was a memory of desperation giving way to hope, and a night that ended with her son held fast in her arms. Chapter 8. A hush settled over the palace after Marlena's triumphant naming of the sorcerer. Most slept on, unaware a near disaster had been averted. In her bedchamber, Marlena knelt by the cradle, protectively shielding her infant son. Yet Rumpelstiltskin was gone. No eerie presence lingered. A single candle flickered, and Marlena heard only her child's soft breaths, her own heart still racing from the ordeal. Though the sorcerer had vanished mere hours before, Marlena's relief mingled with disbelief. She rose slowly, cradling the baby against her shoulder. "He is safe," she repeated, reminding herself that the dreaded vow was broken. Outside, moonlight silvered the courtyard. No watchman's horn shattered the silence. No cloaked figure lingered in the shadows. Summoning her trusted attendant Eleanor, Marlena quietly confirmed that Rumpelstiltskin was gone. "Not even a trace left behind," she admitted. Eleanor, peering at the baby's curled fingers, exhaled in relief. Marlena ordered secrecy. Let the palace sleep undisturbed. Come morning, they would decide how much to reveal. Elsewhere, King Radomir dozed peacefully, unaware of his child's narrow escape. Marlena felt only gratitude that she had shielded both husband and son from the sorcerer's threat. If the king questioned the faint crack in the floor or her anxious eyes, she would feign a nightmare's explanation. He need never learn the full truth. Though exhaustion tugged at her, Marlena's nerves refused to settle. She placed the baby in his cradle and sat at the window seat. Outside, a single torch mirrored itself in the courtyard fountain. The queen thought of every hidden bargain, her father's boast, the king's relentless demands, and nights of spinning straw into gold. Rumpelstiltskin, she whispered, the name still tinged with foreboding. Just before sunrise, Marlena drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning arrived gently, stirring her awake with the soft coos of her son. The hush of the room felt almost sacred, a peace she hadn't known since her forced bargains began. Picking up the child, she gazed outside at the courtyard, bustling with the day's tasks. "We are safe," she thought, "and he is mine." Later that morning, Marlena met with the handful of confidants who helped her discover Rumpelstiltskin's name. She thanked them quietly, insisting their deeds remain secret. "Let the realm believe only in fortune," she said. "In time, I may record this truth so my child, and those who follow, understand how easily desperation invites calamity." Days turned to weeks. Marlena, free of looming terror, embraced motherhood's small joys, feeding the baby, coaxing laughter, relishing each new moment. The king, proud and oblivious to the peril just past, boasted of his heir to visiting nobles. In the calm that followed, Marlena remained quietly vigilant, determined no trace of Rumpelstiltskin's dark magic would ever threaten her son again. Chapter 9. A bright spring sun crowned the palace spires, illuminating polished stone and newly hung banners dancing in the gentle breeze. In the weeks following the sorcerer's mysterious disappearance, life in the kingdom found a steady rhythm, one in which Queen Marlena, King Radomir, and their infant son grew more closely knit than ever. Yet behind the day-to-day routines, a sense of quiet transformation took hold. Gone were the strains of frantic secrecy that once weighed on Marlena's heart. She was no longer haunted by a debt she could not repay. Instead, a calm confidence shone in her bearing. The king noticed it, even if he did not understand its source. word spread across the land that the Queen's miraculous abilities had secured prosperity for generations to come. Farmers brought extra produce to market, hopeful and grateful. Traders ventured to distant realms with renewed enthusiasm. Neighbors remarked on how swiftly the kingdom had rebounded from its earlier hardships, often praising Marlena as a symbol of fortune and resilience. King Radomir basked in their admiration and in the bright eyes of his young heir. His devotion to Marlena became tender and genuine. She, in turn, guided him gently toward a benevolent style of rule, one that recognized the limits of wealth and the dangers of unchecked greed. "Care for the people," she urged him softly in private moments. "Cherish the gifts we already have." And though he remained proud, he listened, touched by her quiet strength. In the privacy of a sunny alcove overlooking the palace gardens, Marlena met with her father, Gerard the miller. He still bore traces of guilt for the boast that had catapulted them into the king's notice. Marlena could see the remorse in his eyes each time he gazed at the splendor surrounding them. "Daughter," he said one afternoon, "I often wonder how you truly did it, spinning straw into gold, then capturing the king's heart. I never meant to put us in such danger."
Marlena laid a gentle hand on his arm. She had long shielded him from the story of Rumpelstiltskin, not wanting him to feel further blame or fear. "What's done is done, father," she replied, voice steady. "We both made choices in moments of desperation, but we're safe now and the kingdom thrives. Let us be grateful for that."
He nodded slowly, as though he wished to ask more, but sensed her reluctance to relive the ordeal. "You are a wonder," he murmured, pride and relief mingling in his voice. Marlena offered a gentle smile. "I am only a woman who loves her child and cherishes her people. That is enough." Although few knew the darker details of Marlena's trials, a faint tension still lingered in certain corners of the palace. Some servants recalled how they once locked her alone in rooms piled high with straw. A handful of courtiers looked back on that period of panic and greed with shame. Marlena, however, harbored no bitterness. Instead, she quietly fostered an atmosphere of forgiveness and empathy. Where once the king's demands had been driven by desperation, now he found new purpose in ensuring the kingdom's stability did not rest on illusions of infinite gold. Marlena encouraged him to invest in farmland irrigation, city improvements, and trade schools. Over time, these measures proved more sustaining than mere stacks of coin in a vault, though the coffers remained comfortably stocked thanks to the gold Rumpelstiltskin had spun before his final departure. In council sessions, Marlena's voice carried a reasoned calm. She championed fair taxes, urging the king to focus on long-term prosperity rather than short-term gains. Her influence grew with each passing month, and her reputation for wisdom spread. The king, seeing the satisfaction of his subjects, stood proud beside her, taking credit publicly, yet in truth he relied greatly on Marlena's steady guidance. Meanwhile, the baby prince thrived in the sunshine of a kingdom at peace. He toddled through the palace gardens, chasing butterflies with gleeful squeals, while Marlena and King Radomir watched from a carved marble bench. They marveled at each milestone, from first words to first steps. Sometimes, when Marlena scooped him up, she felt the echo of that deep-seated terror, memories of the sorcerer's claim. But the fear melted each time the child's laughter filled the air. In those moments, she thanked whatever fate had led her to discover the sorcerer's true name. Rumpelstiltskin, she whispered in the privacy of her thoughts, a name that might as well belong to a phantom now. not every trace of the past vanished. A faint crack on the floor in the Queen's old bedchamber remained where the sorcerer had once stomped in rage. Servants frequently stepped around it, murmuring that it was bad luck to tread too close. Marlena allowed the imperfection to remain unrepaired, a small but potent reminder. She sometimes paused there, reflecting on how desperation and pride had nearly cost her everything. She resolved to teach her son the danger of hasty promises and the value of wisdom over magic. In time, when he was old enough to understand, she would tell him a gentler version of the tale, cautioning him never to let greed or fear drive him into impossible bargains. Seasons turned, and the kingdom's fields turned golden with ripe harvest. Farmers celebrated bountiful yields, merchants returned from trade expeditions with caravans of exotic goods. The city's once disheartened populace now found reason to cheer on even ordinary days. Music floated through the market squares, the bustle of commerce weaving a tapestry of hope and industry. King Radomir, newly temperate and mindful, held fewer lavish feasts of boastful display. Instead, he devoted resources to philanthropic endeavors, establishing schools, improving roads, and ensuring that the poor had enough grain through the winter. Marlena quietly aided in these decisions, her moral compass guiding him toward a reign shaped by empathy as much as by wealth. Within the palace, Gerard the miller was welcomed as family, able to enjoy his grandson's laughter without the sting of regret. Even the courtiers who once scoffed at Marlena's low birth recognized her to be a true queen, not through her ability to produce gold, but through her even-keeled judgments and nurturing leadership. Years passed, weaving fresh memories over the old. The king would sometimes wonder how Marlena had truly spun straw into gold. Where had that power gone? She would answer with a knowing, quiet smile, never giving him the dark details of sorcery and impossible wagers. He, satisfied with the kingdom's new golden age, asked no further. Children in the kingdom played at Queen Marlena, pretending to spin straw into gold, laughing in imitation of a legend they only half understood. Over time, that legend softened into a fairy tale whispered by traveling bards, of a cunning little man bested by a clever queen. Few realized how close that tale came to true disaster. On a spring morning when blossoms perfumed the air, Marlena woke early and ventured into the palace library, a sunlit chamber lined with ancient volumes and new treatises. Sitting at a desk by the window, she began recording her story in her own words, her pen scratching softly on parchment. She omitted mention of the king's ignorance or her father's folly, focusing instead on the dangers of bargains made in desperation and the enduring power of love and knowledge to conquer fear. When she finished, she folded the pages into a slender volume, pressing her royal seal into the wax that bound it. For my son, she thought, setting it on a hidden shelf, and for those who come after him. May they never forget that even the darkest magic can be undone by wisdom, courage, and the courage to learn another's secret name. Leaving the library, she paused in the doorway. Laughter from the courtyard drifted to her ears, the prince's bright giggle as he played with his father in the morning sun. Marlena closed her eyes for a moment, offering silent thanks that the nightmare had passed, and the kingdom stood poised for a future shaped by hope rather than fear. Then with measured grace she walked forward, letting the bustling life of a renewed realm surround her. No shadows trailed behind, no bargains loomed overhead, only the promise that at last they were free, and a new chapter awaited them all. The end.